My name is Marva, and I'm an assistant here at Hotman Group. I'm sitting down with Cheri Hotman today, the owner of Hotman Group. We'll be discussing a topic that's not only pertinent, but crucial for the success and sustainability of small enterprises, especially within the realm of registered investment advisors. Our focus will revolve around identifying and managing risks specific to small enterprises and creating a risk management plan when you don't necessarily have the biggest budget, with a particular emphasis on how these principles tie into the unique challenges faced by RIAs. Welcome, Cheri.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks, Marva, so much for that introduction. Awesome.
Absolutely. Let's jump right in. Why would you say is risk management important for all businesses?
Great question. Ultimately, being in business, we have to be very mindful of risk. Most of the frameworks and a lot of the regulatory require risk management, especially when it comes to cybersecurity. And of course, we see a lot of that in the news today. But the reality is, life is about managing risk, right? And when we're business owners, we should be looking through everything, the lens of risk, looking through the lens of risk on everything, right? And cyber definitely falls into that, cybersecurity and tech risk. So I think, it's just something as a business owner and as a company, you just can't ignore. It's foundational.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. What are the unique challenges and risks that small enterprises typically face compared to larger organizations?
Yeah, the risks are definitely different. I mean, I think about several things. Small companies have less people, so you have people risk. You typically, in a larger organization, there's a concept of a single point of failure or a key man risk. You can minimize that more in a larger organization just because you have more people. But when you're in a smaller organization, it's kind of hard to. It's hard to avoid key man risk if you're a one-man shop or even a 5 or 10 man shop, and then if you have those people that are foundational to your organization and they leave, they're going to take a big part of your organization with them, and so that's important too. I also think about, like, from a compliance standpoint and from the cybersecurity side of things, there's a concept of segregation of duties, and the easiest example of that is if I am the person that checks the mail and I'm also the person that books revenue onto the general ledger, that's a conflict of interest. So we have to employ proper segregation of duties where maybe, Marva, you check the mail and you record that a check was received, then you hand it off to me and I book it in the GL. So we've created that segregation of duties. Well, that concept is very important in the space of cybersecurity. But again, with a smaller shop, it can be hard sometimes to have multiple people involved in a transaction to enforce those segregation of duties just because you just don't have the people. And so sometimes companies have to be pretty clever in how they make sure to build in approvals and to build in those proper segregation and visibility so that it's not one person deciding what needs to be done, testing it, deploying it, and authorizing it themselves and pushing the whole chain through. So those are just a couple that come to the mind right off that a smaller organization would struggle with.
Absolutely. That definitely makes sense and kind of takes us right into our next point. What strategies do you recommend for creating a risk management plan when budget constraints are kind of top of mind there?
Yeah, and every company has constraints. It's a fixed world, right? It's fixed money, fixed time, fixed people, fixed all of it. And so every company has to deal with that to some degree. But you're right, when it doesn't feel like the budget funds are there, how do we deal with that? So I always tell companies, start small, don't over solution it, and then you got to realize this is a journey. It's not, oh my gosh, we got to get to here tomorrow. That's a great idea, grand plan, but the reality is these are very iterative processes. We work with all sorts of different ranges of companies, and sometimes those smaller companies, they don't really know, um, they don't really know what they don't know, and they don't really have any kind of mature processes in place. And so how do they deal with that? Well, start with something and turn the wheels, start the process, start to put those things into place, and don't overthink it. We also work with companies that they don't necessarily do it on purpose, but they overcomplicate this and they think, oh, I've got, I'm here, I got to get to all the way over here. And then unfortunately, that overcomplication can create inaction, and it can create, I think, what's called analysis paralysis, where they sit and talk about it for months and months and months and don't actually, make action and move. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't have a strategy and a plan when you approach this, but you have to do it within the timeline and the budget constraints of your organization. And so something is better than nothing. And then I think companies just need to understand this truly is a journey. The company changes, the world changes, the frameworks change, regulatory changes. And so it really is just a journey of constantly evaluating where you sit and then constantly improving your programs.
Absolutely. That definitely makes sense. And I think that, a point that you brought up there was kind of staying abreast of the changes in regulatory compliance. That's
Yeah,
obviously a big one, and things are
it is.
changing all the time. You run a small business yourself. Can you
Yeah.
kind of give us an idea of how you stay up to date on that kind of thing?
Yeah, that's great. I mean, even in the cybersecurity space, which obviously, Marva, that's what we're in, it's hard, right? It changes all the time. The SEC just threw out new rules, and we got to stay on top of that. The frameworks are getting new versions. Regulatory is coming on the scene, unfortunately, as there's more and more breaches and more companies are kind of not doing what they should be doing with cybersecurity. So it is, you have to stay on top of that. At a minimum, you can go subscribe to different services and newsletters that are free. There's agencies out there. There's some good organizations that you can subscribe to try to stay top of mind of what's going on in the world. So highly recommend that. Doesn't cost anything. It's just a matter of taking the time to what should I subscribe to, and then when they come in, take the time to read those, take the time to review that. And then you can kind of go all the way to the other end of the spectrum of you partner with somebody who that's their space. I mean, many of us have general counsels, we have HR expertise that we leverage. Why? Because I can't possibly know all of those different skill sets and expertise. So we partner with folks who have that expertise. So it starts, just be aware of what's going on in the world. That's pretty easy to all the way to you really start to want to mature this and take this seriously, then you partner with somebody who can help to constantly help you with what is new and up and coming in the world.
Perfect. Perfect. That definitely makes sense. How can small businesses balance the need for compliance with limited resources, and what strategies can be employed to address this?
Yeah, compliance, these days, compliance is a mechanism to provide customer assurance. So your customers will ask you for various different compliance instruments, like a SOC 2, for example, very, very popular in the United States. And it's really to help give confidence to that customer or that potential customer that, especially in the space of cybersecurity, that you're doing what you need to be doing. And so with limited constraint, you only do what you need to do. And so literally I was on the phone with the client this morning who was talking about FedRAMP, which of course is a much more mature and far-reaching compliance framework. And exactly the conversation we had. If your customers are not asking you for it, don't go down that road because it's an expense to implement it and it's even a bigger expense to maintain it. And so you do what makes sense for your revenue. Now, if you have 50% of your revenue is dependent upon you having a SOC 2, well, then you got to prioritize that because that's directly revenue benefiting, or you're going to lose clients that you don't have it. But then if you read about something else and you're like, oh, a high trust, for example, wow, that looks like a great framework. We should go do that. If your customers aren't asking you for it, don't do it. Start small. If you're in a regulated space, then start with the regulation because that's required. So things like HIPAA. And then if your customers are asking for different instruments, then start to move down the path that way, but be very strategic about it and think of it from a customer responsive standpoint, because quite frankly, that's one of the big benefits of all of these compliance frameworks.
Absolutely, definitely great advice. Considering the dynamic nature of financial markets, how do you recommend registered investment advisors or RIAs stay agile in their risk management approach, and what continuous monitoring mechanisms should be put in place to adapt to the changing market?
Yeah, so RIAs definitely have a regulatory element, even if you're a very small shop. And so that kind of takes what might be just a really small business and kind of catapults it into a different strata where you really just can't ignore these things because one, you have a regulatory responsibility. So know what your regulatory responsibilities are. Understand from a cybersecurity standpoint, understand what that is, and then be serious about that. Another, dynamic of an RIA is this fiduciary responsibility to your clients. Well, being mature and serious about your cybersecurity is just as important as how you advise them from a financial aspect. And so I think for an RIA specifically, what's interesting is you can take a really small business that has to automatically mature and automatically operate as potentially a much larger business just because of the regulation and just because of that responsibility to clients.
Gotcha, gotcha. And I know that, with RIAs, it's very interesting what the kind of levels are. So, under 25 million in managed assets means that they don't necessarily have to register at the federal level with the SEC. So can you kind of talk about why it's still important, even if you don't necessarily have to register federally, why it's still important to really have these regulations and compliance down, even as a very small firm?
Yeah, that's a great question. We don't wear our seatbelt, hopefully, because it's a law. Hopefully
Mhm.
we've gotten past that. We don't not text on our phone while we're driving because it's a law. Again, hopefully we're past that. We do it because we want to protect ourselves and protect the those around us. And so I don't need a law to tell me to wear my seatbelt because, I want to be safe. And I don't need a law to tell me not to text on my phone while I drive because I want those around me to be safe as well. And so it would be exactly the same in the case of these businesses, whether you have, you know, actual requirements to do this stuff or not. I would not take that approach. I would take the approach of you want to keep your business safe. You've worked very hard to build your business and to be successful at it. You want to keep it safe. You don't want to be written up in the news as, uh-oh, this has happened. Well, I wasn't required to do this. Right, but we should still be good stewards of whatever is in front of us, and especially good stewards of that which we've worked so hard to build. I mean, just here at Hotman Group, we this, Marva, I'm constantly saying, yeah, we're doing this as an organization because, this particular thing, because that's what we tell our clients to do. So I'm not going to tell our clients to do something that then we don't do. That's not right. So, but are we required to do it? No, but we do it because it's good practice. It's best practice. It's the responsibility to our clients, and it's being good steward over what we all work so hard to make a successful business with Hotman Group. And so I would ask business owners to leverage the regulatory, whether you're necessarily required to do it or not, but to leverage the regulatory to, okay, how can I start to put some of this stuff into place? And how can I start to mature in these areas, even over the course of time, even at maybe a lesser pace? But how can I do this to protect my business, to protect my clients, and just to continue to move that way? And then on top of it, if you expect to grow, those regulations are going to hit you someday anyway. So might as well get ahead of it, right? Because if you grow to a larger company, then you'll be very well poised to take on those additional demands. So great question.
Absolutely, absolutely. So for anyone who maybe is just starting, maybe already has a business, but is really starting to get into that regulatory compliance space, kind of where do they start? What can they actually measure to understand the success of their implementation?
Yeah, this is where you really would, figure out what framework you want to align to, or figure out what your requirements are, and then you work to solution those requirements and get them implemented. And then you want to put measures around them. If you're doing something monthly, then how often are you going to to check that you're doing that. I'll take security awareness training. That's an easy one. If your metric is 100% of your people need to do a security awareness training at least annually, that's great. It should be 100%. But then how do you know your people are doing that? If you don't monitor that and measure that, then you don't know that it's happening. You just assume it's happening. And then you can take that same principle across all of your controls that you would put into place, and especially the controls that would align to a particular framework like a SOC 2. And so that is really the recommendation, is figure out what those key and critical controls are, even if it's just a few to start, and then measure that, report, at the executive or at the management level, report on that. So then, yes, absolutely 100% of our people have had security awareness training because I monitor it.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, that is all the questions I have for you. Thanks so much for taking the time to answer those. And
That
yeah,
was a fun dialogue. Thank you so much, Marva, for taking the time. It was nice to bounce the questions back and forth, and thank you very much.
absolutely.
Thanks. Bye.